The sun had no pity. It burned across the prairie sky like a god at war, white-hot and cruel. Not a single cloud dared interrupt its dominion. The wagon sat motionless beneath it. 4 wheels sunk into dust, the canvas top faded and frayed, the iron lock on the back door searing to the touch. Inside it was a furnace. A baby's cry had gone hoarse hours ago. Sweat dripped from brows and vanished before it touched the floor. Flies gathered in slow spirals. 9 children huddled in the cramped space, limbs tangled, mouths cracked with thirst. Their breathing was shallow, their eyes glazed with heat and fear. Liddy Simmons, 13, wiped her brother's forehead with the hem of her dress. She wasn't the oldest by much, but none of the others had the strength to sit upright. She leaned against the wooden slat wall, every muscle aching, her skin raw where it met the sun-baked floor. Her little brother Tommy whimpered beside her, lips dry and swollen. "Shoo," she whispered. "Save your strength." He blinked at her, too exhausted to reply. The baby, Martha or maybe Mary, no one was sure anymore, let out another mewl, then silence. The air was thick with the smell of piss, sweat, and scorched pine. Liddy's stomach clenched. Not from hunger but from knowing. They weren't going to last much longer. The lock outside had clicked shut that morning. The man, Uncle Ed they called him, though not a one of them was truly kin, had shouted something about needing to fetch water. That was 6 hours ago. Or 8. Or 10. The sun didn't tell time kindly. Next to Liddy, little Caleb whispered something under his breath. "What, Caleb?" she asked, voice dry as sand. "Jesus gonna send someone," he said. "Mama said when the world gets real bad he always sends someone." Liddy looked at him. Caleb's lips were trembling. His knees drawn to his chest. She didn't have the heart to argue. She just nodded and squeezed his hand. Far off, a buzzard circled in the sky. Miles away, a woman named Sarah McCrae lifted a bucket from the well, the rope creaking under its weight. The cool splash of water onto metal echoed in the stillness. She poured some into a jug, the rest into a basin where her chickens drank, grateful and frantic. Her homestead sat alone on the edge of the drylands, where the grass turned brittle and the wind spoke more often than people did. The house was modest, clapboard siding, a warped porch, a stovepipe chimney that coughed on cold nights. A barn stood nearby, half collapsed on one side, its boards weathered like the pages of a forgotten book. Sarah was not old, but she carried herself like someone who'd long since stopped believing in softness. A widow for 6 years now, she wore her grief the way others wore hats, invisible but always there. Her husband, Jacob, had died under gray skies back east, a soldier taken by a bullet and fever in the same week. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in 2 years. Not because she'd forgotten it, but because saying it made her chest ache in a way she couldn't fix with whiskey or silence. She heard it then. Faint. A cry carried by wind. Not quite human. Not quite animal. She paused, head tilted. The chickens scattered. Sarah narrowed her eyes, turning toward the south field. There it was again, thin, high, desperate. She set the bucket down. It took 15 minutes to saddle her mare, Clover. The animal was restless, picking up the unease in the air. Sarah packed a rifle, a water jug, and a knife she hadn't touched in months. Something about the cry. It wasn't just noise. It was need. She followed the wind and the smell of heat until she saw it. A wagon in the distance, shimmering like a ghost in the mirage. At first she thought it abandoned. Then she saw the scorched wheel ruts, the flapping canvas, the buzzards. And then, the movement. A hand slapping weakly at the slats from inside. Sarah dismounted slowly, rifle slung across her back. She moved cautiously, boots crunching over cracked soil. As she approached, she heard the sound, soft, frantic tapping, then a child's voice, rasping, begging. "Please. Please let us out." Her breath caught. She took another step. "Who's in there?" No answer. Just a choked sob. She touched the iron lock and jerked her hand back. It burned. She squinted at the mechanism. Simple. Brutal. Meant to keep animals in, or children. Inside, Liddy lifted her head at the sound. She thought she'd imagined the voice. But Tommy's eyes widened. "Someone's out there," he whispered. Liddy pushed herself upright, fingers clawing at the door. "Help," she croaked. "We're in here. Please." Sarah's fingers tightened around her rifle. Every caution she'd ever learned whispered at her. This could be a trap. Outlaws had done worse. Bait a wagon, wait for a bleeding heart, then strike. But she looked again at the faint outline of small faces behind the cracks. They were real. She dropped to one knee, unfastened her canteen, and poured a trickle of water through the slats. Tiny fingers reached for it. Gulped, cried. One voice broke into hysterical thanks. Sarah stepped back, breathing hard. "You hold on," she said. "I'm gonna get you out." She took her rifle butt to the lock. 3 hits. The third cracked it open with a sharp clang. The door creaked as she swung it open, and the heat rolled out like a living thing. The smell hit her next. Flesh cooked by sun. Rot. Urine. Fear. But what stopped her were the eyes. 9 children. Skin flushed red. Lids heavy. The youngest barely moving. The eldest girl, barely older than her own daughter would have been, met her gaze not with panic but with grim focus. "Please," the girl whispered. "My brother, he won't wake up." Sarah didn't speak. She just moved. She lifted the nearest child, a girl who weighed almost nothing, and carried her to the shade of the wagon's shadow. Went back for the boy. The children were limp, gasping, too weak even to cry. One by one she pulled them out. Used her shawl to shade their faces. Let them sip water a spoonful at a time. Liddy sat last, unable to move, her legs unbending. Sarah crouched in front of her. "You the oldest?" Liddy nodded. "What's your name?" "Liddy Simmons." "Who put you in there, Liddy?" "My uncle," she said. "Said he was taking us to California. Said he'd come back with water." Sarah scanned the horizon. Nothing. The land stretched flat and empty. But she knew this country. And she knew lies when she heard them. "He said that yesterday?" "No. This morning." Sarah's jaw tightened. She helped Liddy down, propping her against a water barrel. The girl winced but didn't complain. Tough as nails, this one. The sun dipped an inch lower, though it brought no relief. The silence stretched long and uneasy. Sarah turned to the wagon. 9 children. And not a horse in sight. No supplies. No map. Just the dust and the heat and a woman who hadn't been a mother in 6 long years. She felt the old ache stirring in her ribs. The one she buried every spring when the flowers refused to bloom near her daughter's grave. Behind her, a child began to cry softly. She stood. A flicker of movement in the distance caught her eye. A shape. A rider. Approaching slow. Her fingers went to the rifle slung over her shoulder. The rider didn't hurry. Just drifted forward like he belonged to the land. Broad-brimmed hat. Rifle across the saddle. A pack slung tight behind him. Her gut clenched. "Liddy," she said, not turning. "That uncle of yours, what did he look like?" Liddy's voice was thin. Black hat. Long scar on his left cheek. Rode a horse with a white blaze on its chest. Sarah stared. The rider's horse had a white blaze. Her grip tightened on the rifle. Behind her, the children were silent. Dust swirled around her boots. The buzzards had stopped circling. Sarah raised her voice, clear and firm. "You best state your business." The rider pulled his horse to a stop. He didn't smile. "Just came back for what's mine," he said. Her voice stayed steady. "They ain't yours." He tilted his head. "Ain't for you to decide, widow." Sarah lifted the rifle. The man smiled, thin, cold. He reached slowly toward his holster. And then Liddy said behind her, barely a whisper, "That's him." The man's hand froze over the butt of his gun. The sun sank lower, turning the dust blood-red. Sarah didn't move. Not yet. The standoff held like a stretched wire, tight, humming, ready to snap. Sarah didn't blink. Her rifle was trained steady on the man with the black hat and the cruel scar cutting through his left cheek like a canyon in worn earth. He hadn't moved since Liddy named him. Didn't have to. His presence alone darkened the dry air like a coming storm. "You put 9 children in a locked wagon in the middle of the sun," Sarah said, voice flat as iron. "They're half dead." "They were trouble," the man replied. "Squabbling, whining, slowing the journey. Had to keep 'em still for a while. I was gonna come back." "Days ago?" Her tone made the lie shrivel where it stood. He spat into the dirt. "You don't know what you're meddling in." Sarah shifted her weight, finger near the trigger. "I know neglect when I see it." Behind her, the children clustered in the shadow of the wagon. Caleb had his arms wrapped around Martha's tiny form, rocking her gently. Liddy stood, legs shaking but upright, like she refused to collapse where he could see her weakness. The man flicked his eyes toward the group. "I'm still their blood." Sarah didn't lower the rifle. "Then it's a bad bloodline." For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind kicked dust between them and the silence sharpened until it felt like something alive. Then he dismounted. Slow. Deliberate. Hands visible. "Don't," Sarah warned. He raised both palms. "You ain't gonna shoot me." "You sure? You're just a widow with a gun. I've seen your kind. Lonely. Soft-hearted. Too scared to pull the trigger unless the law's watching." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Her hands didn't shake. I buried my husband and my daughter in the same week. Held my girl through her last fever. Watched her cough blood till she couldn't anymore. You think I got fear left in me? His jaw tensed. Still. You shoot me, you got 9 kids and no law to back you up. You lay a finger on any one of them and I won't need the law. For a moment he weighed her like a gambler sizing up the odds. Then with a slow breath, he stepped back toward his horse. I'll be back, he said. With papers. With men. You'll see. You're not their kin. No, she said. But neither are you. He mounted and turned without another word. His horse's hooves faded into the horizon like the end of a bad dream. The silence after he left felt like the hush after a gunshot. Sarah lowered the rifle. She turned to find 9 pairs of eyes watching her, wide, tired, unsure. Tommy spoke first. Is he gone? For now, Sarah said. Liddy didn't sit down. He's gonna come back. Yes. Will he bring others? Maybe. The wind stirred again, tugging at the hem of Sarah's skirt. Liddy's jaw set. Then we can't stay here. Sarah nodded, then glanced at the sun slipping toward the west. You're right. But none of you can ride far today. We'll die if we stay, Liddy said, her voice hardening. And we'll die if we rush and fall off our feet, Sarah replied gently. That silenced the girl. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Sarah looked at them, at the cracked lips, the red skin, the eyes dulled by thirst and heatstroke. They needed rest. They needed water. And they needed to be somewhere else before that man returned. She made a decision. Come with me. The cabin was less than a mile, but the journey felt longer. Sarah led the way, riding ahead on Clover while the children walked behind, each leaning on the other, bodies too weary to speak. She fetched water in turns, soaked cloths to wrap around their necks, fed them dried beans and cornbread with shaking hands. She built a fire low and slow, not for warmth but for safety. Wild animals prowled, and now there was a bigger threat riding somewhere out there. Inside the cabin she cleared space. Her home had always been sparse. 1 bed. 1 chair. A table. A faded quilt folded on a trunk. It had never felt full until 9 sets of footsteps crossed the threshold. They collapsed onto the floor, grateful just to not be under the sun. Sarah crouched near the hearth, pouring water into chipped cups. Liddy sipped first, slower this time. Her voice was rasped but clearer. Why are you helping us? Sarah paused, then answered honestly. Because someone should have helped my daughter. And no one did. Liddy nodded as if that made perfect sense. That night, sleep came in fits. The children murmured in dreams, cried out now and then, but they were alive. Sarah sat in the doorway with her rifle across her lap, watching the moon trace its path through the sky. When dawn came, she already had the plan formed. By the time the children stirred, she had 2 sacks packed with food, rope, a spare rifle, and every coin she could find buried in the kitchen drawer. Liddy sat up first. Where are we going? She asked. Sarah looked at her, seeing again the steel beneath the girl's tired frame. There's a town east. Dry Creek Junction. Sheriff, there's a decent man. He'll listen. But it's 2 days' ride. We don't have horses, Liddy said. No, Sarah agreed. But I've got a cart. And we'll take turns riding. If we ration water and keep out of sight, we can make it. Caleb looked up from the floor, voice trembling. What if he finds us first? Sarah met his gaze. Then he'll find we ain't as soft as we look. They left just past sunrise. The children rode in the cart, shaded by blankets strung over poles. Sarah walked beside them, rifle strapped to her back, eyes constantly sweeping the horizon. Liddy walked with her when she could, stubborn in the way only a girl who had seen too much could be. They made it 15 miles before the dust kicked up behind them. A rider. 1. Too far to tell. Sarah pulled the cart off the road, ushered the children behind a dune of rock. She knelt beside them. If I tell you to run, she whispered, you head north, follow the stars. Don't stop till you find a creek or a town. Tommy clung to Liddy's arm. Martha started crying. The rider grew closer. Sarah stood. He came slow, not charging. That didn't comfort her. His silhouette was wide at the shoulders, hat tilted low. She stepped forward, hand on her rifle, braced. Then the rider lifted a hand in greeting. Close now. Not the scarred man. A stranger. But not armed. Ma'am, the man said, voice quiet. You wouldn't be Sarah McCrae? She frowned. Depends who's asking. Name's Eli Banner. Sheriff of Dry Creek Junction. Got a telegram from the marshal in Elkhorn. Said a woman helped 9 abandoned children and might be headed our way. Sarah lowered her guard by an inch. We haven't reached the junction yet. Well, Eli said, dismounting, seems I beat you to it. The relief nearly knocked her off her feet. But she didn't show it. He looked over at the rock formation, saw the faces peeking out. His expression changed, gentled. Lord above, he whispered. They're just babies. They're survivors, Sarah corrected. Eli nodded slowly. You did good, ma'am. I'll ride with you the rest of the way. We'll get them safe. For the first time in days, Sarah breathed deep. And somewhere behind her, Liddy whispered to the others, Told you. Someone always comes. But even as the cart moved again and Eli rode beside them, Sarah knew it wasn't over. A man like the one with the scar didn't vanish. He circled. He hunted. He waited for the next moment of weakness. But now he'd find more than a widow. He'd find a wall. And she wasn't alone anymore. The dust hadn't even settled around Dry Creek Junction before the whispers began. 9 children, battered and burned by the sun, arrived in a rickety cart pulled by a widow and flanked by the town's own sheriff. It was the sort of thing people noticed, especially in a place where nothing much happened besides the occasional drunken brawl or late train delivery. Sarah kept her head high as they passed the saloon, where curtains twitched and conversations paused. She could feel the judgment in the stares, some curious, some disapproving, others quietly sympathetic. But she didn't care. Not about stares, not about talk. She had only one purpose now: keep the children safe. Sheriff Eli Banner led them through the narrow main street to the courthouse. It wasn't much, 2 stories sagging in the middle like it had seen too many summers and not enough repairs, but inside it was cool and it was law. He gave her a look before pushing open the door. Judge Parsons in. Sarah nodded once. Let's get this done. The children clustered behind her as they stepped into the dim room. Judge Parsons sat behind his desk, spectacles perched low on his nose, skin like creased parchment, eyes sharper than glass. Eli spoke first. Judge, this here's Sarah McCray. She brought 9 orphaned or abandoned children out of the flats west of here. Left to die in a locked wagon. The judge squinted. Locked wagon? They were near dead when I found them, Sarah said, voice steady but thick with memory. No water. No food. Just heat and a man who called himself their kin. Parsons leaned back, fingers steepled. You have names? Sarah gestured behind her. One by one, the children stepped forward and said their names. Some hesitated. Caleb stammered. Martha clung to Liddy's leg and said nothing. But it was enough. The judge scribbled in a large book. We'll have to verify. Cross-check birth ledgers. Send word to Elkhorn, maybe even San Miguel. That'll take weeks, Sarah said. Law is slow, Parsons replied, but deliberate. Sarah's hands curled into fists. These children don't have weeks. The judge sighed, removing his spectacles. What are you proposing, Mrs. McCray? Temporary custody, she said. Until the law sorts itself out. You're not their family. No, she said. But I'm the only one who's cared if they lived or died. The judge studied her. The room held its breath. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. Very well. Temporary guardianship until further review. Sheriff Banner will oversee conditions. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned, only to find Liddy already watching her with something close to awe. That evening, she moved the children into an old boarding house at the edge of town, long since abandoned by a traveling preacher. The wood creaked under every step and the windows rattled in the breeze, but it had 4 rooms and a roof, and that was more than they'd had before. The townsfolk remained cautious. Some left bread on the doorstep. Others crossed the street when they passed. Sarah ignored them all. She had more important matters to deal with, like lice, bruises, nightmares, and learning how to stretch dried beans into meals that fed 9 mouths and 1 weary widow. The children changed slowly. Caleb smiled when he thought no one was looking. Tommy started drawing animals in the dirt outside the porch. Even Martha spoke, though only in whispers. And Liddy remained strong, though Sarah noticed the weight she carried in her shoulders. One morning, after mending a ripped dress sleeve, Sarah found Liddy alone behind the house, staring at the horizon. He'll come, the girl said without turning. He always comes back. Sarah stood beside her. Then we'll be ready. Liddy's brow furrowed. You don't know him. I don't need to. I know what fear does. I know what people become when they've been told they're powerless. Liddy looked up, skeptical. And what do they become? Sarah met her gaze. Dangerous. The girl almost smiled. But the next day danger arrived. Sheriff Banner rode hard into town, his horse lathered and panting. He found Sarah and the children in the yard, where they'd been tending a sad excuse for a garden. "They're coming," he said, breathing hard. "4 riders. 2 miles out. Including the man you described, scarred cheek, wide hat." Sarah's mouth dried. She looked at Liddy. The girl's expression didn't shift. It hardened. Banner dismounted. "I'll stand with you. But we'll need to be smart. You're not on your homestead anymore." Sarah nodded. "We need time." "Buy it." They moved fast. The children were brought inside. Sarah blocked the windows with crates and overturned chairs. Eli set up his post on the porch, shotgun across his lap, revolver at his side. Sarah paced the floor. She could feel it again, that same crackling energy from the standoff days before. Only this time there were more of them. And they weren't riding to talk. She went to the back room. Found Liddy loading her slingshot with small, jagged stones. "Stay inside," Sarah told her. The girl didn't look up. "No. Liddy. You need me," she said. "I can shoot. I can aim. And they won't expect it." Sarah stared at her. "You're a child." "So were they when he left us to die." The words cut deeper than Sarah expected. After a long moment she nodded. "Then stay by the back window. Only shoot if you see someone coming close." Liddy gave a single nod. The thunder of hooves grew louder. Then it stopped. 4 men dismounted outside the house. Sarah saw them from the front window, Scarface among them, a leer stretched wide across his jaw. He called out, "Mrs. McCrae, we've come for what's ours." Sarah stepped onto the porch. "You came for children you abandoned to die." He chuckled. "That's your version. It's the truth." He gestured to the others. "We've got legal papers now. Letters of guardianship right here. Town of Elkhorn." Eli stepped forward. "Let me see those." The man held up a paper. Eli took it, examined it. His face darkened. "These are forged." Scarface shrugged. "That's your opinion." "It's the law's opinion," Sarah said. "You think this law's gonna protect you?" Sarah's voice rang out, clear and cold. "I know it will. Because I will." Scarface's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll die with them." And just like that, the air shattered with motion. He went for his gun. But Sarah moved first. She ducked, rolled off the porch, came up behind a barrel. Eli fired. One of the men screamed and dropped. Another scrambled behind a tree stump, gun raised. Inside the house, glass shattered, Liddy's slingshot found its mark. A second man fell, howling, blood seeping from his temple. Gunfire cracked through the heat like a thunderstorm. Sarah crawled through the dirt, flank burning, legs driving forward. She took aim and fired once, then again. One bullet grazed her shoulder. She didn't stop. When it was over, 3 men lay wounded, moaning. One, Scarface, tried to crawl toward his horse. Sarah stood over him, rifle aimed. "You come near them again," she said, panting, "and next time I won't stop at your leg." He looked up at her with venom and fear. "You don't know what they're worth. They're not yours to sell." Eli hauled him up. "You'll be tried. I'll make sure of it." The sheriff of Dry Creek Junction had never seen his jail so full. Later that night, Sarah stood on the porch, bloodied and bruised. The stars blinked overhead, uncaring. Beside her, Liddy stood, quiet, holding the slingshot. "You were right," the girl said softly. "Fear makes people dangerous." Sarah turned, one arm slung in a torn piece of cloth. "And courage makes them unstoppable." From inside the house, the sound of children laughing rose up, light, unburdened, free. Sarah smiled. But she didn't relax. Not yet. Because survival was only the beginning. Night fell over Dry Creek Junction with a silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like a breath held too long, the kind that makes your ribs ache. The sheriff's jailhouse sat still, lantern flickering weakly in the window. Inside, 3 wounded men sat chained and sour, Scarface among them, his leg wrapped in a dirty bandage, his eyes full of promises not yet spoken aloud. Promises of vengeance. Sarah stood in the doorway of the boarding house, arms crossed, rifle slung on her back even as the stars came out. She hadn't slept more than a few hours in the past 2 days, but she wouldn't rest now. The children were inside, piled in corners with patched blankets and tired breath. All 9 of them. Safe for now. Liddy joined her on the porch. The girl had barely said a word since the shootout, but her silence wasn't fear, it was calculation, thought. Her eyes held weight beyond her years, as if she'd been older before and now wore her childhood like an old dress that didn't fit anymore. "You think they'll come again?" she asked, voice low. "They always do," Sarah replied. "Men like that don't quit easy." Liddy nodded like she already knew. He told the others about a deal. About money. Said we weren't just mouths to feed. Sarah didn't flinch. She'd suspected as much. Trafficking children's not unheard of out here. Too many empty papers, too few honest men. They were gonna sell us, Liddy said flatly. Sarah met her eyes. But they didn't. Because of you. No, Sarah shook her head. Because of you. You stayed alive. You kept the little ones breathing. I just showed up in time. Liddy looked away, and for a moment the silence between them softened. But it didn't last. A distant boom cracked across the night. Not thunder. Something sharper. A single gunshot followed by a scream from down the street. Sarah turned sharply. Another shot rang out, then glass shattered somewhere near the general store. From the dark, a lantern lit. Then another. Townsfolk began to stir, opening doors, stepping out onto porches. Confusion thickened in the air like smoke. Sheriff Eli came running, boots pounding the dry earth. They're gone, he shouted before he even reached the steps. Scarface and the others, they're gone. Sarah didn't hesitate. How? Someone opened the jail. Killed the deputy. Anyone see it? Not a soul. Quiet as dust. Sarah grabbed her rifle and turned back into the house. Get the children up. Get them ready. Eli frowned. You think they're coming here? They don't have anywhere else to go. And they won't leave without finishing what they started. Inside, the children stirred quickly, as if some primal instinct warned them that the dark wasn't safe. Tommy clutched his little sister's hand. Caleb helped gather shoes and coats. Even Martha stood silently, arms wrapped around a doll that hadn't belonged to her 2 days earlier but now wouldn't leave her side. Sarah moved with precision. She handed out small knives, tools, anything sharp. Liddy took her slingshot again, jaw tight. They're hurt, the girl said, but they'll still be fast. They're desperate, Sarah corrected. That's worse. Eli stepped in. We can hole up at the church. Thick walls. One entrance. No, Sarah said. They'll expect that. We stay here. Set traps. Control the space. Eli looked at her, eyebrows raised slightly. You ever fight a siege before? I buried 2 family members without a priest, she replied. That taught me everything I need to know about survival. He didn't argue. They worked fast. Barred the doors, hammered nails into boards, stacked crates into makeshift barricades. The children watched her, mimicked her movements, trusted her without question. She was no longer just a widow in their eyes, she was command. An hour passed. Then 2. The town settled into a strange hush. Then the horses came. Not galloping. Not wild. Walking. Deliberate. 4 of them. Shadowed. Faces hidden beneath dusters and wide-brimmed hats. Sarah was at the window, breath slow, heart loud. Eli crouched near the door, shotgun in hand. Liddy waited upstairs, eyes on the side path, rocks at the ready. One of the men called out. Sarah McCrae. You've got something that ain't yours. Sarah didn't answer. You think law's on your side? The voice continued. Law's just ink. Fire burns ink. Still no answer. Pause. Then came a match's scratch, then fire. Bright and fast, too fast. A bottle flew through the air, hit the front wall, and the whole porch erupted into flames. Sarah screamed, down? The fire licked fast up the siding, catching on dry beams. Sarah grabbed a blanket, soaked it in water, slammed it against the frame. Eli fired through the doorway. A scream followed. Liddy shouted from above. One down. Sarah pulled water from the wash basin and tossed it on the flames. It barely held them back. They're burning us out. We can't stay here, Eli growled. We don't have a choice, she shouted. The house groaned with heat. Smoke poured through the gaps. Then Martha began crying. Not a whimper, a full, gut-wrenching cry that shattered every fragile second they had left. Sarah grabbed the rifle and turned to Liddy. Take the children out the back. Cross the alley. Find the stable. Liddy shook her head. Not without you. You're faster than me. I don't care. You will, Sarah said. When they're all safe. Outside, gunfire cracked again. Sarah pushed Liddy toward the back. Now. The girl ran. The others followed, Tommy carrying Martha, Caleb covering the rear like a soldier trained by pain. Sarah turned, rifle raised, and fired once, twice. She hit the window. She hit a shadow. The second man screamed. Then the front door shattered open. Scarface walked in through the smoke like death itself, blood dripping down one side of his face, pistol raised. You're a thorn, widow? Sarah stood tall. And you're just another coward. He smiled, broken teeth catching firelight. I kill you, they scatter. Sarah fired. He ducked. Her shot hit the wall. He lunged. They crashed into the table. Her rifle flew wide. He struck her across the jaw once, twice. She kicked, rolled, grabbed the edge of a chair and brought it down on his back. He snarled, pulled a knife. Then a rock flew through the open window and hit him square in the forehead. He staggered. Another rock. Another. And then Liddy appeared, at the doorway, breath ragged, slingshot trembling in her hands. "Get away from her," she said. Scarface turned. Sarah took the chance. She grabbed the poker from the fireplace and drove it forward. He dropped, face first, unmoving. Silence returned, filled only by the crackling of dying flames and the rising wind outside. Liddy dropped her slingshot and fell to her knees beside Sarah. "You okay?" Sarah sat back, breath shaking. "I'm alive." Eli burst through the back moments later. "The others ran. They're gone." Sarah nodded. She looked at Scarface's body, then at Liddy. "So are we." By morning the fire was out. The children were safe. Townsfolk gathered at a distance, still unsure what to make of the woman who'd stood against men with guns and fire. Sheriff Banner wrote up his report. "You know, you could press for official custody now. Might even get a medal from the governor." Sarah looked at the 9 faces now watching her with hope. "I don't want a medal." "Then what?" She smiled, tired but proud. "I want them to never need rescuing again." He tipped his hat. "That's the better prize." Days later, the children were given new clothes. They stayed in Dry Creek Junction in a house rebuilt with neighbors' help. Sarah taught them to read, to shoot, to speak up. And Liddy, once the girl who'd been locked in a sun-scorched wagon, stood tallest of them all, her slingshot now replaced with a rifle she carried like a badge. When folks passed the house, they didn't call it a miracle. They called it a beginning.